Welcome back to the Biohacks podcast, and we have got a very special guest today. We are joined by elite mindset coach Dean Leake. He's been in professional sport and working with professional athletes for the past, I think, 10 years plus. We're going to be delving into some insights on how a mindset coach can help you improve your health and your performance. So, Dean, thanks for coming on, buddy.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to have a chat, see where it takes us.
Do you want to give the guys a bit of a background on how you became a mindset coach?
Yeah, definitely. As you said, I've been involved in elite sport now for the last 10 plus years. So been really blessed to have supported athletes that have gone on to achieve highest accolades in sport. So started out as studying sports psychology at university. So I've always had a failed athlete, never going to make it.
What was your sport?
Pardon?
What was your sport?
Many. Football, squash, tried loads of different things, but never quite worked out. So I was always fascinated just by human beings, quite a social guy, just always curious about how do humans tick. So I went on to study sports psychology at university. I was really fortunate at uni to have met a guy who was starting to emerge to be pretty famous at the time in elite sport, working for the cycling team, called Professor Steve Peters.
Yeah.
So he wrote the Chimp Paradox, and I basically went and barged in on a presentation he was giving at university and said, your stuff's great, can I get involved? And he ended up supervising me for about 5 years, which was because I was just fresh out of uni, kind of no idea what the world looks like, and it gave me a really good insight into kind of the elite world, but also how the human mind works from somebody who's the best at their job.
What uni were you at?
I went at Bournemouth University, so I'm South Coast, so remained connected to the city, and it was a good place.
It must have been, maybe it was the same tour that I actually saw Steve Peters talk at South Kensington it must have been maybe 2013 or 2014. So maybe it was around that time. Maybe it's the same.
Yeah.
He was obviously doing the rounds, I guess, but really insightful, super insightful. I can see why you went and kind of grabbed him afterwards, because I remember, I think there were some really interesting points that kind of stood out and kind of actually have stayed with me all the way through. I guess that he kind of took a very complex subject and broke it down into some really kind of simplistic ideas, which are obviously very practical as well. So I guess you got a good start there in terms of having a great mentor.
No, 100%. So meeting him opened up doors, and basically since then, which was about 10 years ago when I met Steve, I started out as a mental skills coach with a number of different sports. And then I moved more into, I was really passionate about helping athletes, develop their mindset, but then I moved into more of a leadership role. So I started working for the Great Britain Taekwondo team as their talent pathways manager. And again, that was working with humans at a more system level. So how do we create an environment so that we can get the best out of people and maximize their potential to go on and win, medals at the Paralympic and Olympic Games? And then more recently been working for the Olympic shooting team. Just really blessed over the last period of time to have worked with some exceptional people, both athletes, practitioners and coaches. And now I'm kind of, I'm still very much involved in Olympic sport and Paralympic sport, but I'm really interested in taking that out into different sectors. I'm currently spending quite a lot of time in the fitness world and trying to kind of take that system to help people, whether it's manage their anxiety or lose weight. How do we get ourselves into the best position to give ourselves the best shot to be that person that we want?
Interesting. Wow. It's really insightful. And I think, and have you seen much crossover from elite sport into the kind of fitness world? Is there?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because in my experience, clearly, if you're a fan or you're the media, you tend to big up athletes to be these superhumans who are born with these innate skills. But in my personal experiences, what I find is that you've got a human being who's developed a skill set within an environment which has supported them to achieve what they want. And one thing that's absolutely in common is that we're fundamentally a human being that is emotional, thinks emotionally and acts emotionally, but also what drives human beings is the need to progress. So the athlete, they've got this dream to go and win Olympic gold. But you look at you and I and any person, whether it's to improve relationships or to lose weight, they're trying to progress every day. So we've got that connected through that ambition to be better every day. But we're often sold this image that elite athletes are these kind of superhuman robots that are born with these skills, when that's actually not grounded in any research. They are part of an environment that they've been, blessed to have been a part of, but we can actually create that environment for us. We can create our own environment to help us thrive.
And would you say a lot of that environment's come from the fact that their parents, or like they've had schools, or is it kind of things that they've done when they've been growing up normally, would you say?
Definitely. I think, the thing what's really interesting about when you look at a talent pathway is that there isn't a linear pathway to success. And what I mean by that is that there's no formula or recipe, as much as the marketers and the people out there that try to simplify down these performance to try and sell that there's a one way to do it. Actually, every person's different and everybody's come from a different set of circumstances. But I guess what we're trying to do is go, okay, what are the principles of which has allowed them to achieve what they've done? What's those that didn't go on to achieve success, and what can we learn from that to apply in different worlds? And that's kind of where I'm at now, is going, let's break that down and go, what are the things that successful people have that they've developed that has enabled them to maximize their potential? And I've found that it's complex, and it's very easy. And there is, I guess, because as human beings, we don't like uncertainty. So when you don't like uncertainty, we want to simplify it so we can understand it. That's really easy, but that isn't helpful, because then you start to miss out the really important bits of what actually enables a human to grow.
100%. And I guess it's that facing up to adversity and facing challenge, which is actually where all the learning happens, right? And I guess that's obviously what you're alluding to, is that by skipping out those parts, then you don't actually grow. The actual individual doesn't grow and doesn't progress and doesn't learn anything, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if you were to look at any successful person, whether that's an athlete, a business leader, anyone that's gone on to be successful in whatever they've done, they wouldn't have got to where they've got to without any failure or mistakes along the way. That is, we can start to shift our mindset from what we've always been taught, which is that we have to succeed, to actually mistakes are important. So how do we shift the mindset to get to a position where we seek mistakes, because that's actually what makes us grow? 100%. That's different to let's avoid taking risks, because if I fail, then I'm not going to be successful. So in reality, in school, which is always trying to get us to focus on outcomes and exam success, let's get them to experiment and try things, because that's the things that's going to help them grow to be a better person.
Interesting.
And you see that in athletes all the time. Like, athletes are the best because they sometimes win, they sometimes fail. In Taekwondo, you get kicked in the head, sometimes you don't. It's all part of that failure that's going to help them grow.
It's really interesting. I always find that, actually, it's one of my things. I'm a big athletics fan, and I always find some of the athletics events I find really interesting, the fact that you always end on failure. So I always think about like the example of like high jump or pole vault. It's like you always end, like your whole competition is the fact that there will be a height that you haven't got over yet, I guess, or most of the time anyway, unless you're a symbiote and you just keep going up. Right? But yeah, no, I think there's some really interesting points there. Let's go in just. So what I thought maybe we'll do is we'll kind of look at maybe the elite athlete and your background and kind of some of the kind of insights that you have on elite athletes, and then I thought that maybe we could go into looking at how somebody listening to this, how someone like yourself and the principles that you teach, like the mindset coaching that you deliver, how that could potentially help them. Does that kind of...
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, perfect. Sounds good, yeah. What kind of commonalities or what kind of learnings have you had from working with elite athletes? Can you maybe delve into some of the kind of key principles and things that some insights that you've had?
Yeah, definitely. I think if we're trying to put this into some sort of context and look at a system of what athletes or what a support team does to help an athlete, and I call this like having a mindset map. So what we're trying to do is get to a position where we can be really clear on where we're trying to get to. Okay, so there's a need for a sense of ambition and a purpose. So what we tend to do, whether it's going to achieve fitness goals or going to become better at a particular sport, is we just start going in that direction. but we don't actually, and what we're relying on there is our emotions, which is unhelpful, because emotions, sometimes we're motivated, sometimes we're not. So actually what we need is real clarity on the direction of travel. And one thing I found with elite athletes, and the ones that are the best, is that they have a very big ambition. Okay, so it isn't a case of like winning the national championships or maybe even winning a World Cup medal. Like, they are like relentlessly driving to win an Olympic gold medal. But not just because goals in itself aren't enough, in my experience. Because what I found is that even when people achieve that outcome, they start to reflect on why that was important. And sometimes they go, I don't know why I did it. And then they have a sense of like loss or missed. And it's like, what do I do next? And what I found is that it's actually purpose and values that are the things that are really important. So it isn't just about the goal, it's about understanding, why is that important to me? So is it about giving back to the community? Is it about inspiring a nation? Is it, and typically when you look at this, and it's grounded in things like, I don't know if you've ever explored like the 12-step model to change, or anyone that's like been an addict or suffering, for instance, because there's an interesting relationship between reward and suffering. Connecting yourself to something which is bigger than yourself.
Yeah, something
a
big,
real sense of purpose. That's what then starts to drive a real motivation and connection to what you're trying to achieve.
Interesting. And so I think that's a really interesting point. So I guess what you've done there is highlight, like, if you want to work to help people achieve the goal, you have to break it down to like a sequential order, right? And I think obviously what you're saying here is that the first part of what you want to do is to be very clear on the direction and what is the goal. And I think actually, I guess what some of your job is then probing and asking deeper questions to the individual to make sure that the goal, because obviously, like exactly like you said, like in terms of the rational and the emotional part of the brain, is that delving into what it is that's actually driving you towards that goal is actually probably the first place that you want to start with an athlete. Really, really interesting. Ask better questions, get better answers, right? I think.
Totally. That like the more that we can all become better coaches, because this is another thing. If you were to look at some of the gamification principles, and you look at games, the reason why they're so addictive and they create such an amazing user experience is because they put the control in the user. So they allow the user to create choice.
Wow.
And this is important, is that when a human being doesn't like to be told what to do, all right, so it wants autonomy and it wants ownership. And here's a really good example that I use for like parents.
Yeah.
So imagine like with a child, and you could say like even like a 6-year-old, in your mind, you're like, I want the child to go to bed at 7 o'clock. Now, we all know that if we tell the child to go to bed at 7 o'clock, it's going to say, no way, I'm going to go to bed when I want. But you could try a different technique which introduces choice. So bear in mind, your objective is to get them to bed at 7 o'clock. All you need to say to them is, Harry, would you like to go to bed at 6:30 or 7 o'clock? And he's going to say 7 o'clock, but he feels like he's been empowered to make that choice.
Wow. So simple.
So you can see how like there's subtle difference with telling somebody versus engaging them in a choice.
What's really nice about that is that you've taken something which is cerebral and you've turned it into a practical example. So especially for if my sister's listening to this, for her 4-year-old, this is this is a great piece of advice. But that's really, really interesting. So by empowering the individual and by giving them choice, what you're actually doing is you're actually helping them to make the decision for themselves, which in turn, I guess, it's a tick in the box, isn't it, for them? I guess it's then helping them move towards the kind of the correct outcome. That's really, really interesting. Just going back onto what you said before about the we're kind of talking again initially about the sorry, I've just kind of lost my chain of thought. Anyway, there's a second point I just wanted to make, but that point was quite insightful. So moving on from so the kind of the initial part, what are the kind of things have you seen from athletes that are?
Yeah. So as a reminder, the first stage is about the purpose and the direction.
Yeah.
Starts to talk about choice. The other thing that's really important, just before we move on to the next stage, is that not only choice engages people to take ownership, it makes more sense from a human being's perspective, because if we allow them to problem solve and be a part of the planning process, then they're going to be more invested in it because they own it, but also they're going to learn skills. Whereas like, if I tell you what to do the whole time, you ain't going to learn anything because you've been, whereas this is about trying to develop problem solvers. And that then implies that you're going to make mistakes because you're experimenting more. So it kind of sets the scene for purpose. Now, the next step is actually setting out a series of goals as to what you get, how you're going to achieve it. Okay. Yeah. So you've got this big ambition that you're trying to get to. Yep. Like, the next step is, how are you going to get there? It sounds simple, but this is where you need a plan. So what's your map? What resources do you need? And what do you need to put in place in order to achieve that gold medal, that weight loss, that business ambition? That this starts to map out the steps in order to get there. Sense?
Yeah, 100%. And just on that, so actually, because my point just came back to me, I knew what I was going to ask. Then you talking, you kind of brought my point back to me. So I was talking, my question was about, so we talked about the big goal, and obviously then you've got this kind of process to getting there. And you were talking about this idea of like the falling in love with the craft. That was basically my question. It's like this idea that rather than being just driven by the goal, like, do you help to make people kind of fall in love with the actual process that they're partaking in? That was my question. Now that it's kind of come back to me.
Totally. And this at the heart, again, is at the heart of gamification. So what we're trying to do is get somebody to be present in the moment. Okay. Because when I'm present in the moment, I'm more focused. I'm giving more meaningful effort to that task that I'm doing. And what you find within games is that people are utterly addicted to it because they enjoy it. They're having fun. So how do we create an environment where we are enabling people to have fun and enjoy what they do? What you'll find, this is where like flow starts to come in. And you see this in elite athletes, that they start something and then 2 hours later, they're looking at their clock and they're like, how has the time flown by? It's because they're in flow state, they're enjoying it. So again, the question for us is, when we're working with clients, how do we create an environment where we can have fun at the heart of what we do? Because we know that then they're going to be more present. And by being present, you're free from all these unhelpful thoughts and feelings that we're tackling in daily life.
And I guess, is that hard to put in place in practice? Because what happens if somebody's got, like, say we're talking about work, or if it's something that they really hate and they really don't enjoy? Like, is your job then to actually ask a bigger question and say, is this what you should be doing with your life? Like, if you really hate this much, like, I guess, do you have to then look at the actual things? I guess maybe it's like you even taking the step, you kind of end up kind of working your way back into, like you said before, asking more questions.
Totally. It's a really good point. And I think we're trying to get to a position where we can ask people, what's important to you? What's your values? And when you get to that place, the interesting bit is that when you've got your values in place, you then start to use that as a reference point as to how you're interacting with the world and part of the job. And what you often find is that people are doing jobs that they don't like. So it really starts to then, it gives them the ability to question what's important to them, most importantly.
And I guess it's like, it's creating that, like you said before, like starting with that sense of purpose. And I guess sometimes you have to go backwards and reassess. And I guess because we're always changing as well, that's another thing. Like, what were your values 5 years ago or 2 years ago or even a year ago? I guess they're fluid, that we're fluid, dynamic beings, aren't we? And I guess things change over time and your values change. And so I guess what worked for you maybe 5 years ago, maybe doesn't work for you now. So I guess that's one of the challenges of your job, is that you're having to, again, I guess, is that hard on like a one-to-one level if you're working with someone and you're having to ask them these are deep questions, like about relationship, about work, about, is that hard? Like,
it's great because you're working with somebody and you're trying to get them to start to become the person that they want, and they've got so much they've got such a shield or a script that they've always lived by, and get them to take ownership of the story that they've created throughout life. And then they now believe that that's who they are as a person, which isn't true. The person that they want to be is the person that they actually are. Right. And when they start to shift and understand that, then you see massive transformations. And that's what we're trying to do, is get somebody to see that the way in which they have been living their life isn't how they can live it the rest of their life. They can shift to become the person that they want. And that's great when you're working with people on that level.
just really smashing through it, just breaking down the stories and just really helping people kind of, it's interesting. It's so interesting, man. Awesome. So we've got a map. We've spent a bit of time. We've been delving in and asking better questions and helping them get the alignment to figure out what the goal is, what it is they want to achieve. They've started on the process, and so then you started to do a bit of gamification and try and help them reach flow states, help them lose sense of time, sense of self in whatever the task it is that they're basically looking to kind of improve in. And then, so what's the kind of next step? Is it what happens when you pull off? Resilience? Is it what's the next step?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So, what we now need to explore, and you made a really good point a minute ago, is that the world is uncertain and complex. So it's really so it's easy for you and I to work with somebody to develop a sense of purpose, develop a map as to what you need to do. So right now we've got the best plan in the world. Okay, it is like designed by the best scientist, the best coach, so they know what they need to do. But then you get kicked in the face when you get into the real world because things are challenging, right?
Yeah.
So what we need to do is understand the terrain that we're navigating in, and the terrain is messy. It changes. COVID comes along and smashes the plan, like, you know, whatever
Chaos.
it is. So yeah, exactly. You're in chaos. So what we start to do is go, what it could stop me achieving what I want to do. So we start to then get a grip of what does the environment need to look like that's going to help me achieve my plan or stop from me achieving my plan.
Interesting. And do you build those out? You build that out before you execute? Like those need to be there ready so that when chaos comes, you know what to do. You have a plan in place.
Yeah. So you can never plan for everything because we can't predict the future. It's impossible. You can't, because it's changing so quickly that it's always changing. So we can never for sure predict and understand what the future looks like. But what we can do is develop a mindset that if we know that, then we're able to cope with it better and manage it in the moment. But we can do little things like, for instance, if I'm trying to lose weight, okay, and I've got cookies in my fridge, the cookie's going to get eaten, mate. Like, it's not that's not helping me in my environment. So what can I do to help me that's going to enable me to get to where I want to? If you have friends that are alcoholics and every time you go out and they're telling you that you need to drink, come on, keep drinking. Like, you need to have a conversation with the friends or find some new friends because they're not going to help you.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess what I'm kind of taking from what you said there is that by having this plan of action or having these options, obviously you don't know exactly what's going to happen, but is it again on the idea that you're giving people the control again? You're giving them a place to turn to when chaos comes. It's this idea that they have got some form of something tangible that they can turn to, and it puts them back in the power, puts them back in space of power.
100%, because like if you're asking them what could stop them, they're taking ownership of that, and therefore they're starting to develop the sense of self-awareness and problem solving. Because it's you and I every time saying, tell me what to expect, you know, they're not going to see something coming. If they can prepare their mind to think that there are uncertainties in the world, and that things change, and they then have the skill set to be able to, and the confidence to be able to manage that.
100%. So rather than telling them exactly what to do, you're giving them the tools and the principles to figure it out on the fly.
Yeah, it's like a framework, right? It's not a recipe, it's a framework that they can operate within. And also, going back to the goals piece, what I've found as well, particularly, and let's take diet and weight loss, for instance, people start their journey with, I want to lose 20 pounds, which is fine because like that might work and they might have a great plan and they'll lose 20 pounds, but then they'll put it back on again because that's what happens. The thing that actually creates the change is having that purpose, because the danger when you set, and when you speak to people who are weight loss and you say to them, why are you actually doing this? You can get to the point where they'll say something like, I'm doing it because I want to bring joy and happiness to my family because at the moment I can't do enough because I'm not fit enough. So there's a deep sense of purpose. But the danger when you just set a goal is that the goal becomes the outcome when it often isn't. So, you know, this is why the goals have got to be set in the context of why it's important to you.
And I guess this is really something just popped into my head then as you were saying that, but I think it's kind of in terms of you're helping me kind of reframe some of the things that I've kind of understood. But this idea that what your job really is doing is you're going past the superficial, and you're helping people connect with themselves on a deeper level, and gaining a deeper understanding. We're more than just these fluid filled sacks of liquid. Like, there's a lot more going on there. And I guess, obviously, I know the title of this video is "How Can a Mindset Coach Help You?" And I think what you're really doing is you're helping people go beyond the surface, the superficial, and you're helping them delve into the deeper understanding of themselves, like self-mastery. And I think that's what enlightenment, when the Buddha or any of these sages would talk about enlightenment, I think that's probably what you talk about, self-awareness. I think that what you're doing is you're basically helping people reach a state of enlightenment.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
really
absolutely spot on. And that's part of the work that I do is and it's interesting that you use the word like Buddhism there, because I almost describe it more as like therapeutic coaching, my styles. What I'm trying to do is understand, what do you want? Like, so if I say to people, like, how do you want to be? So if you start to describe, like, what are your characteristics that you want to become? They'll say things like, I want to be relaxed, I want to be balanced, I want to be confident, and I want to be successful. And then I say to them, well, that is who you are. And they're like, no, that's actually who you are. But you're not being that person, because when you look at the brain, like, we have this very powerful emotional part of the brain. So what Steve would term the chimp, which is there to look out for danger. It's there to ensure that we survive, and it reacts to things very emotionally. So it's doing the job really well. It's not good or bad, it's just emotional. And to that, to the point we talked about earlier, is that we have this script that we've developed, or what is our belief system over a period of time through parental influence, our interaction with the world. So we've now got this script of how the world should be. So when you look at it in that context, the brain is actually working against what we want. We can start to notice and understand what's going on for us psychologically. We can then start to shift into a position where we can start to be the person that we want, because the person that we have been isn't who we are. So how do we start to shift that blood supply into a place which is more linked to our values and create the future that we want? And when people start to grasp that concept of, actually, I am not that anxious person, or, the constant thoughts we have, such as, I'm fat, I'm always a letdown, I'm never going to find the right partner, I always let myself down. Like, if we can start to, and here's a question, if we can start to observe our thoughts, then by doing so, we realize that we're not our thoughts. If I can observe my own thoughts, then clearly that's not me.
It's like so I was going to say, it's like taking taking one step outside yourself. I remember a friend of mine always told me, like, what advice would you give yourself? This idea, like, if you've got a problem that you're trying to solve, like, what would you advise your friend to do? And I guess it's exactly the same thing what you're saying there. This idea that you can step away. And I think the first part of like we said before when we were talking about the kind of your map, is that the first part is that realization.
100%. So, what we tend to walk through when I'm working with somebody is, and it's linked to a model called acceptance commitment therapy. So what we're trying to do is, like, the first stage is noticing what's going on. So self-awareness. So if I can notice my thoughts, by doing so, I can make a choice in the moment as to what I want to do next. Because in reality, what happens over a period of time is that we create stories from events. So if somebody says to me, Dean, you're stupid. Okay, that's what happened. That's all that happened. Somebody said, Dean, you're stupid. But the emotional scar comes from me interpreting that, such as, they're right, I am stupid. I always let myself down. I always fail. So now we've got a story. But that I created that story, nobody else. So when I can notice that, I can then start to go, okay, which is stage 2 now. I accept that I have a machine that thinks emotionally and interprets things in an emotional way. Start to go, notice and accept. I can then start to become more present in the moment, because that's what we're trying to get to, right? We're trying to be present so that we can just start to interact in the world against the next step, which is my values. And without values, you can't move forward, because Otherwise, you're just going to be reacting emotionally to everything rather than what I want to live my life like.
100%. And I think, again, like I said before, like you're creating this stable foundation. You're helping people create, like you said, the framework and this foundation to be able to be aware, to be able to notice, and to be grounded enough within themselves to know that the things that people do say to them, there may be an element of truth to it, there may not. But I guess it's for them to make the decision about the information that they're processing out there. And I guess this is what it all comes down to. We're trying to take complex information, and I guess your job, and obviously doing things like this and having these types of conversations, what you're helping people recognize that there is this is the future. Like this is like the next level of, like we started off, like the Harvard School of Fatigue in 1943 created the field of exercise science, and before that, if you went running like back in the 1900s or you did training, people thought you were weird. Like it was kind of like this weird thing. And it's kind of, we're in this age of enlightenment and age of flourishing where people can now, we train physically. And I guess the next stage is not only the physical, obviously I try not to segment the body in terms of physical and mental too much, because obviously I see it all as one system. But I guess what you're doing and the job that you're doing is basically this, it's like this mental gym. It's the next stage on. It's helping people recognize that there are other ways to be. You're not the sum of all the stories that you've been told. Just a quick question on this: is the mind naturally skewed towards the negative as a, like you talked about protection and safety and stuff, like are we naturally skewed that way? And does it, just because I remember reading something about PERMA. It was a guy, do you know the PERMA analogy? It's a guy in the States, positive emotion, engagement, meaning, what was our relationships, and A was accomplishment. And it was basically this framework that he used. And basically he was saying that, from what I've understood about the text, is saying that naturally it's a skill, like you have to learn positivity. Would you agree with that? Like, would you say we're naturally skewed towards the negative?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. And I think, so if you were to take us out of sport a minute and look at politics, if you were to look at where a lot of political campaigns are very successful, is they speak to people's fears. So human beings don't like uncertainty. They want control and they look out for danger. Because if you think about it, when we were in the jungle, if we didn't see danger, we wouldn't survive. So actually, it's not that it's good or bad. It's just that it's not helpful in modern day society. So actually, like, you're probably right that it's not potentially about negativity or positivity. It's that we've just got this emotional brain. And by the way, everybody's emotional brain is slightly different, but there's some principles. But it's there to look out for danger. So it's more likely to walk down the street and hear a noise and look, because it's there to look out for danger. So it's really geared more towards kind of, negativity, looking at things more unhelpfully. And if we can notice that, then we can start to shift into a position where we want to be.
Yeah, and I guess maybe that's because, like, we're going into like evolutionary biology here, but I guess maybe it's the reason why we're here having this conversation now, since humans have been, depending on what you believe, like humans have been evolving over the last 6 million years since our last, I guess maybe it was only the people with this type of framework that had naturally a more cautious way of being, the ones that survived and passed all that information down onto us. And then obviously we're just here in the modern day, and we don't have war, famine, or disease anymore. So we have to find ways to kind of manifest, and I guess it gives us the opportunity now to choose. I guess it's that choice, and I guess it's the next stage of evolution.
And what we want to be trying to, if you think about it as well, like society kind of beats out creativity, doesn't it? Because the more we grow up, the more exams that we have, the more expectations to do that dream job at the end of the day. It then creates this sense of like perfectionism and the sense of like we must achieve an outcome, and it beats this whole idea of play and experiments, because human beings, as they grow up, start to see consequence more, don't they? They start to take less risks, whereas kids just don't give a shit, do they? They just dive in, go for it.
True.
How do we create that mindset in adults now?
And I guess maybe some of that's to do with the fact that obviously schooling, workhouses, industrial revolution, I guess maybe this is a business opportunity for us here, but I'm sure other people are working on it. But it's this idea that it's an old style of schooling. And I guess obviously because it's so ingrained in our society now, obviously to change that it's going to be slow and it's going to take time. But I guess people like you who are out there banging the drum kind of helping people understand that there is more to the human mind than just science, math, English, these other techniques and other ways of looking at goals and outcomes and other frameworks that could potentially take humans to that next stage of evolution.
Yeah. Interesting. You mentioned something a minute ago that provoked a thought in me around. So, like, what does the future look like? So we know that we can't predict it, because, like, who would have predicted what's happened in the last 12 months? I mean, my God, like, how much has happened in the last 12 months? Nobody saw it coming. So if we work on the basis that we can't predict it, but let's look at, like, what might happen. So I wonder whether the real skills in which we need to develop is how we're able to understand and create learning experiences for people so that they can start to engage more meaningfully in things. And what I mean by that is that as a human, we're faced with more choices now. So if you like, it's the marketer's dream, isn't it? So, like, we're operating now at a subconscious level where we're just buying things because there's so much choice out there. There's so many things in our direction. So as somebody that's selling a service or selling a product, how do we create something which really, really creates an amazing learning experience for people? That's going to be the next thing, I think, rather than, all these, like, magic pills that are being sold and all of these kind of fad things. Like, how do we create meaningful learning experiences? And that is at the fundamental level of all of this, is understanding the human being, understanding kind of what's going on for somebody psychologically, what are their drivers, fears, and how do we help people create better understanding.
Interesting. And I guess this is so kind of that segues nicely onto my kind of final points before we end up wrapping up, is this idea that to reach your goals and to improve, obviously you have to have a level of education. You need to educate yourself. And I guess this is where, obviously, answering the question of the podcast is that, so if somebody wants to improve and they want to get better and they've got a particular goal and outcome, education, we know, learning and obviously having a meaningful experience while learning is important. And so what is it, like, how can let's answer the question, how can a mindset coach like yourself, how can you help someone hit their goals? I guess it's, obviously, we've talked about the map and we've talked about the framework, but kind of, could you give us just a bit of a rundown, like how does it work? Say I came to you, like, how does the system and process work?
Yeah. So what we've discussed is that this isn't about giving somebody a plan or giving them, like, all of the knowledge in the world to go and do what they want to do. Okay, that to some extent is the easy part, but it's about them understanding and noticing what's going on for them psychologically. So how can I help them create self-awareness so that they can start to implement the plan? And when I started about 12 years ago and I did a PT qualification, it dawned on me really quickly that there's some amazing PTs out there with the best strength plan and the best nutrition plan, but the clients don't know how to implement it because they can't stop eating. That isn't about the nutrition. They've got the best nutrition plan in the world, but their emotional brain wants to eat everything and they don't know how to control it. So how do we help teach them the skills to manage their own mind so that they can implement the plan? That's the key bit. And then really just kind of, again, it sounds like a cliche, but it doesn't happen. It's understanding the individual. So, like, whilst I have a principle or a method to help people, every person's different and everybody has different story, different background, different set of circumstances. And it's about helping them to understand what that looks like for them so that they can navigate that terrain for them, rather than trying to sell this kind of 8-point plan that's going to change, their life. It's actually, here's some principles, here's some methods. Let's help you understand what's going on and give them the skills. Going back to that point, let's create choice, ownership, and autonomy to get the best out of humans rather than trying to prescribe things and tell them what they need to do. So yeah, there's a lot more to it than that, but hopefully paints a bit of a picture as to what that.
100%. That's a really great, in-depth kind of guide to what it is and how you can help individuals. If guys want to find out more from you, Dean, what's the best? Obviously, we can leave links in the comment section below. What's the best place to get hold of you?
Yeah, definitely. So I actually run a mindset program for people. I'm just kind of recalibrating that, going to launch in October. But to get in contact with me or find out a bit more, just go onto my Instagram page, which is Dean Leak Coach, I think.
Okay, Brilliant, brilliant. So guys, yeah, if you've got any questions for Dean, head on over to Dean Leak Coach. We'll put a link in the description below, and you can drop him a note on there. I'm sure he'll have some kind of very wise words for you. Dean, I really appreciate you coming on today, mate. I want to get you back on because I know there's lots of things we kind of some other topics I want to delve into. But it's been really insightful, just understanding a bit about your background, understanding a bit about performance sport, and then understanding a bit about the mental mapping and the processes that you use to kind of help people kind of hit their goals and achieve their goals. So thanks for coming on, buddy.
No, I appreciate it, buddy. It's been real fun. Really enjoy loads like having these conversations. So I appreciate coming on.
Guys, if you've enjoyed the video, hit the like button. It obviously helps us with the YouTube algorithm, and then also hit the subscribe bell and the notification bell for when Dean's back on, we create some more cool content like this. Dean, really appreciate your time, bud.